And my company, Renegade Performance Group, is a dance company that's based in Brooklyn, New York. And through the dance initiative, we will be rehearsing. Well, we've been rehearsing, excuse me, at Brooklyn College for the past 7 to 8 weeks. And in part of the residency, this is part of our community engagement with Brooklyn College. And so I started an Afrofuturism series with my company in beginning of 2014 in January, looking at the role of dance and performance in this medium that since about, I guess, the mid 90s has been steadily burgeoning and getting a foothold in the arts itself. So just going through, we can start. So Afrofuturism itself is a term that was coined in 1994 by Mark Deary in relationship to especially literary writers. One on the bottom is Samuel Delaney, and then to the top right is Octavia Butler, and then especially relationship to music with works of especially Sun Ra, and then I can also mention possibly Alice Coltrane, George Clinton, and amongst others. I guess in more recent events, those artists working with a little bit more notice visually in the art world. Can everyone hear me okay?
A little louder, just a little bit.
A little bit louder?
Yeah.
In the art world, visual art world, this is Wangechi Mutsu, who's working with the medium, looking at the black female body and also almost into the android body, right? Extending that presence into the inanimate being, or the bionic being, if you will, through her visual work. Let me go back. Someone I kind of his work is interesting to me. This guy named Mark Bradford. I don't know if I could necessarily consider him maybe Afrofuturism, but he definitely is in the sense of what I would consider Afrofuturism, of really kind of playing with different archetypes or understandings within, especially African American culture, and really, really abstracting them. Really interesting work. I was introduced to his work at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, and really interesting guy. Someone possibly will also look up as well, Mark Bradford. Continuing on, music. These are a few artists again who have been in quite a notice of late. Thundercat, Michelene Deglicello, Flying Lotus. In the music world, really pushing the boundaries of what black sound is and what it can do. And then, like the sound we're hearing now, this is actually our panelist, Jeremy Toussaint-Baptiste, and his work, Crowns. And Jeremy will get more into what he's doing a little bit later. Unfortunately, I thought the video could play. It does not play. Apparently, it does not. It works fine via YouTube, but via the Prezi, it does not play with the Hunter.
So I'll have to give you what that was.
Yeah, we'll go through that once we start. Again, well, this is weird.
You know, Brooklyn College is pretty weird about YouTube. Like some things will run, some
Well,
things won't.
now, so Michelene Hess is playing this, which is interesting.
You started running? Yes, it is. It's called Malice in Ovenland, and I started it some years ago. I started with my wife. I said, "What was it? Let me actually have a finished, completed book that I can at least have for myself or to sell." And then it kind of blew up.
Oh, really?
And so it was picked up by Rosarium Publishing.
Oh, that's amazing.
And right now I'm working on the second issue, and it will be at least a 3-issue run. Possibly more, though, because I'm just kind of having a lot of ideas popping out of my head. And yeah, so it's going to have to be rolled up probably into more issues.
So how did you start the series?
How did it come to? I started this series. I was a friend of mine's stepdaughter. I was kind of enchanted by her.
We'll continue with her a little bit later.
She was very bold and outright curious, and I wanted to kind of capture that. And I created Lily. So I think one of those that I had some Japanese lover. You named it Michelene Hess.
Come back, Michelene Hess, when she arrives. And finally, this is a little bit of my work. I'm a dancer choreographer, I was just saying, and don't know if this will play either. Seems to not like. This is Vimeo. It is also Vimeo. Okay. I apologize. We will not be able to see my work as of yet either. So from that, come on in, everyone. Thank you for coming. So more specifically, my work is specifically looking at the visual artist Ronald Z. 1 second. This is Michelene. Hello, Michelene. Hello, Michelene. Yes. Yes, you are. Yeah, the library is the building with the white steeple on the top. And then you come. Then just say that you're coming in to the panel, which is in the Tanger Auditorium. Yep, and then we're waiting for you. And then we're waiting for you. No problem. No. So specifically, my work is looking. The piece I'm constructing here at Brooklyn College is looking at graffiti as a form of Afrofuturism, especially inspired by the late artist Ronald Z, who was just an amazing visual artist, performance artist, musician, theorist, and just kind of true pioneer in kind of new wave and urban folklore and urban art spawning from the late 70s, or we would say hip hop era. So with that, and the short arrival of Michelene, we can get started with the panel. So, turn the lights on. That's about it. So, thank you again for everyone that's coming. Our moderator tonight is going to be Brook Stephenson.
What's up, Brook?
Who's here. And yeah, we can get started. So,
Quick question: Has everyone read the hyperallergic piece that we?
yes, should be. Brook.
You read it? Yes. I mean, as far as the folks out there.
Oh no. Did not know.
Sure, I could read it.
Yeah.
Okay, what he's referring to is a piece that was written or published anonymously by someone who works in the art world as a reaction to what's been going on lately with in the news and who's been dying in the news and we feel about it. So I'll read it quickly for you so you can reference what we're talking about. The piece is titled Blacked Out in the Art World and it's published by Hyperallergenic, and it was published on December 5th, 2014. And the editor's note is the author of this article, who works in a prominent art PR agency, requested that the following be published anonymously as not to jeopardize her job or professional contacts. It is not easy to be a Black woman working in the arts, not on days like today. It's been 11 days since we learned that the officer who killed Mike Brown won't be indicted. 3 days have passed since Eric Garner's murderer got off scot-free, and 12-year-old Tamir Rice was buried. I'm having trouble keeping track of the casualties in the war against Black bodies. But if you were to ask my colleagues at the New York art PR firm, they tell you that all secondary to Art Basel Miami Beach. You'd think that today was another day of museum acquisitions, art world gossip, and business as usual. It's not business as usual for me though, because I have to reconcile what it means to work in a community that is indifferent to my existence. That's not hyperbole. In arts PR, we pay attention to all news because art is dependent on culture. Many of my coworkers would argue that art is life, and we take pride in keeping each other apprised to major headlines. We refresh the pages of international news outlets all day, and when something of particular interest happens, you'll often hear one of us yelling from our desks to share with the office. When the cat calling video went viral, we were crushed. A blogger compiled Chris Pratt memes, and we gathered in gawked. Kim K's daughter painted her Hermes bag, and we gagged in unison. So imagine my continued surprise that the news about Brown and Garner still hasn't been acknowledged. Are Black lives not relevant enough? Is the Black experience in today's America not worthy of discussion? When my coworkers don't acknowledge Mike Brown and Eric Garner, that says to me that my life and the lives of people who look like me isn't important, or at least it's not more important than Miley Cyrus's latest quote-unquote artwork. It's a paralyzing feeling to be surrounded by people who don't acknowledge that hashtag Black Lives Matter. I've accepted that as long as I'm in PR and not working for a Black firm, I will more often than not be the only Black person on staff. I'm okay with that because I'm of the belief that people of color need to play a role in telling the stories of artists of color, just like it's important for women to speak and write about female artists. I believe my Black perspective is imperative because sometimes it takes a Black person to be the authority on Black subjects. It's just that simple. What's not simple is trying to balance my position as a Black woman in the world with my position at work. When colleagues and clients make ignorant statements, I do not want to bite my tongue. Yet, I know that if I make public every internal battle I face in the art world today, I will be seen as the angry Black woman. And no matter what feature story I place or epic crisis I have heard, my successes will be trumped by my attitude, and that doesn't fit company culture. On days like today, though, I'm realizing just how harmful silence really is. It's not like my colleagues don't know how to talk about Blackness in the arts. We talk about it all the time. We write press releases upon press releases about the importance of promoting artists of color so that their perspectives are included in conversations about race today. And when we're successful, we pat ourselves on the back for a job well done. Because of our work, another Black voice is featured and audiences are educated. And we sleep easy knowing that we've made a difference. Today, though, there's no conversation, no job well done, no sleeping easy. It's a problem that I work in a profession that capitalizes on how cool it is to be Black until it's not cool to be Black. If the André Riley decided to make Black men killed by hashtag damn good cops the subject of his next portrait series, the art world would care. Riley's dealers would rightfully sell his work as important documents of our time, and they'd make a pretty penny. Curators and critics would praise the series as an important reflection of this turbulent moment in American history. My colleagues would tell the media that an exhibition of his work is the most important statement about racism today. Unfortunately, racism doesn't only exist when white people want to acknowledge and benefit from it. I have now learned what it really means to be a Black woman working in the arts. It means I carry the burden with none of the gains. It means that Black lives in this country will never be more newsworthy to my peers than our world scandal. It means that I need to come to terms and accept that many of my peers who exploit Black art and the Black experience really don't care about these issues when it really counts.
That opinion editorial can be found in Hyperallergic. Again, the writer is anonymous. She is a black female working in a New York-based PR firm that was doing work in Art Basel.
So to start it off, André emailed all of us and wanted us to read that and come up with a slice of that to respond to or comment on. So, I believe, okay. So I will start with the gentleman to my left. I mean, right. So what selection of that did you pick to talk about or discuss?
For me, I thought what was significant about that was the very question that she was posing, which is basically, are Black lives important to people that are not Black? And it was a bit problematic for me because she sent in this thing anonymously. For me, I thought if you're going to talk about the issue, if you're going to raise the issue about the Black lives not mattering, then it would be, in my opinion, it would be a stronger gesture in a way, let's say, to not be anonymous, to be the voice that no one else is going to be, that no one else in your firm is talking about. And I think that sometimes there's this, well, as she says in the article, there's this conflict of trying to exist in this this other world as a Black person, but then to exist in this other world. But for me, I just think that the whole thing is problematic. I understand the idea of being anonymous, not wanting to, be the angry Black woman who's always coming up with, problems about stuff, like got an issue with this, got an issue with that. But I thought, well, this one seems kind of important. I mean, I think of all the issues that this would be the issue that you would not mind to be the angry Black woman about, or the angry Black person about. And so for me, that was my sort of problem or conflict with this whole article. I thought, well, just say who you are so we can talk about it, so we can really talk about it.
Several of the points made in the piece were a bit problematic for me as well. It overall just raised a lot of questions for me. The fact that she posted it anonymously immediately raised the question of, like, is she afraid of this conversation coming off as an indictment of her white peers, and why should she be afraid of that conversation coming off as an indictment, given the history of systematic and systemic imbalances that are already in place. The notion of being concerned with being perceived as an angry Black person is also quite problematic, especially within the art world, where there is space both in PR and in the actual practice to be an angry person, an angry woman, or an angry queer person. And I feel that that space also needs to be available without Black people feeling the need to check themselves. Everyone deserves that space to express their anger in those ways, and even in the PR office there is a very productive way to be able, that can be done, and to skip that is a less than brave mark, I believe. Furthermore, the piece raised some questions of the notion of tokenism in the art world, and who are the Black artists that we're seeing, what are the stories that are being told, and who's actually benefiting from these stories being told beyond the artist. Are people benefiting within the communities that are then able to increase visibility in some very real ways, or is it only going back to the gallery owners and the curators and museum people working in the upper echelons of the museum world or gallery world? Why The other question I want to sort of pose is, why are we surprised if we take what she says at face value, that the art world does not equally value Black lives or Black stories? In the art world is by and large a function of a capitalist system, which in America de facto operates by devaluing a group of people's lives, and the fact that race and economics are so closely linked, especially in America. You can't really separate the notion of capitalism from its sort of racial implications, and the capitalism by and large devalues brown lives. So I don't think that we should fool ourselves into believing that the art world is as romantic and beautiful and all-encompassing and, for lack of a better way of putting it, lovey-dovey. We're still playing the game, and we need to recognize it as so. So what does it mean to acknowledge that and try to move forward from there? Those are my questions.
I'm going to keep mine short. What I took from the article was the point of how do we benefit from our art, meaning any form of performance, written work, music, sound, literature, film. I think that's a question for me that is important. That for me is Afrofuturism. The notion that a community is actually benefiting from the work produced from its artists. And that's what I would like to concentrate on, or just maybe get some feedback and ideas from amongst us tonight.
I finally made it. I got some interesting points in the article, and there were actually a lot of times where I felt myself shaking my head because I understood just where she was coming from as far as how she felt. I also noticed that she chose to remain anonymous, and I understand where she's coming from as far as being concerned of being labeled or being stigmatized as being the angry Black woman, because I think once you say something, once you respond, a lot of times in places like that, I work at an ad agency, you could craft the most eloquent response, although I think I myself would probably end up coming off sounding like Courage the Cowardly Dog, trying to explain a situation to Muriel. But that aside, I mean, I think a lot of times it gets to a point where they don't really see the issue anymore. They see you. It's like, oh, there she is. And they're more, people tend to be more restricted. They don't speak as freely. They don't really understand where you're coming from, and it's very difficult. I was out at a work-related function a couple of days ago, last week actually, and this guy, not that far from me, we were talking about the protests in the city, and he was saying, well, it was at 34th Street. They said, they won't be satisfied till they ruin everyone's Christmas. And, it was like, some kind of an a-hole, like, don't you get it? Don't you understand why people are so upset? And that's the thing that troubles me the most, is that no matter how concise, no matter how to the point you are with a response, I just feel like people with that kind of mindset, people who live every day where they know it's never really going to touch them the same way it does with Black men and women, just aren't going to see it. They aren't going to see the issue. They're just going to see you. So that's my difficulty with it. And I can understand why she would choose to take anonymity.
Yes. Okay, so we heard 4 different points of view there. And one of the underlying things, and I know when me and André talked about this article earlier this week, one of the things that I noticed about it, or one of the things I was thinking about in terms of Afrofuturism specifically, is the same things that the panelists have been talking about here. Who are these artists? Who's benefiting? People, shaking my head, I understand. How do we benefit from our art? It's what I see, and I'd like to hear what they think about this, is that in the arts, it's always the issue of the black artist stating what is the state of black people in the society at large. That's what I usually see happen. That's what every artist is doing, or for the most part, those who are successful commercially. They're always that artist. In Afrofuturism, I would think that we're talking about a fundamental shift in that sort of art making or art production, where it's not all about the black experience in the mainstream versus the inception of the idea of we're all one species, and to go from there and create art. And so for the panelists, I'm posing the question, if we made that sort of shift from the black experience in the mainstream to the experience of humanity itself and how to interpret that, how might that change the landscape?
Live? Yeah, it's live.
So actually, that's the question of how do we benefit from our art, and following up your question regarding all of these things is, to me, Afrofuturism sort of hinges on the notion that we can envision lots of new futures through our present experience that may be informed by history and informed by past experience, but is executed in a very different way. That's why in sci-fi you see the very fact that people of color exist in a sci-fi film is a huge statement. It means that they've persisted and persevered long enough to be, in the year 2020, or that's not so far away anymore, 20,000 million, I don't know. But the very ability to present an experience other than the black art with capital, big, bold, B and A letters, being able to experience or express something other is a key facet of the Afrofuturist, or what it was supposed to be able, or is supposed to be able to convey. And I feel like as artists sort of embrace that, you'll see stories beginning to deviate away from the traditional, even things that are so represented, things that sort of rest solely on using the black body. I feel like we may see artists beginning to shift away from using the black body as a representational image or a signifier for greater blackness, and being able to use other source material without necessarily not being considered a black work, doing black work.
Okay. So I'm going to go back, which addresses more specifically the Afrofuturism as a movement. Well, I'm interested in this subtitle, or the title of our panel, this idea of futuring the present of the blackness in the future. And so then I did a little working on that for myself, just to see if some other ideas made sense too. And so what I came up is presencing, making present, the future of blackness. And so basically the words are still there, but they're reordered in a way which addresses what Jeremy was just talking about, which is this idea that we must be there, right? So we must, as I wrote, we must be there, which means we must proactively create a plan that ensures our presence, right? So like, okay, so let's connect it to what is going on in the news now. Well, if they're killing us every day, then yes, I'm over exaggerating maybe in terms of every day, or whatever the occurrence is. But the idea here is that if we're dispensable now, then we won't make it to a future. So this idea of Afrofuturism, well, for me, won't exist, because it will only be a theoretical idea, because we won't actually be there. if we keep getting killed. And so my whole idea here is that now is what Afrofuturism is now. It's like we got to deal with where we are now so that we can project into the future ourselves. And so this idea of, you know, who we are now, what we are doing now, what we are standing up for now, will ensure our future. If it is this sort of projection in the future for this, in the sense of being able to speak as humans, be able to create this art that may not have a person that looks like me in that, you know, as that representing image, then I have a little problem with that, because that to me means that we haven't quite dealt with where we are right now. So I can't help but to think of Afrofuturism as Afro presentism, like Afro now and tomorrow, and let's see where we can get with it throughout the week. See if another one of us gets killed. You know what I mean? So this whole idea of like, where are we now? How are we gonna make it to that future? Or is it only gonna be mediated? Which you would have seen in the video that I was gonna present, that it was to be presented. It was a question, it was a video installation where I recorded myself dancing, and then I projected it onto the floor, onto this mylar with this sort of floor drawing that comes from Haitian voodoo veves. And so the idea was, you know, in the future, how will our rituals, how will our practices and things like that be represented? Will they be mediated like most everything else in our lives? Or will there be real flesh and bone there still practicing and being present in that future?
The first thing I was thinking about when I was listening to your question was back in the first thing it made me think of was back in the late 90s when Milestone Comics closed their operations in New York City, and I was working for them as a colorist, and you know, I remember how crushing it was for them to bring everyone out and tell us that they weren't going to be continuing to put out issues. I got so excited when I had the opportunity to work with them in the first place. I quit my job. I was working retail, and I was just like, well, see ya, you know, and they were like, what about 2 weeks? And I was like, I can't hear you, I'm coloring. So it was wonderful because it was the first time I saw them, you know, people, you know, everyone, there's all these people of color, they were all producing, writing, illustrating, inking, and telling these wonderful stories with these incredibly diverse characters. And like I thought that was it. And it took me myself such a long time to get back on track as far as producing my own comics. And it still feels like it's something that is a fight. You know, last summer I was telling a friend at work, this guy I work with, I was going to ECBOC, which is it's a small convention in Philly. It's mostly African American art and artists, and he was like, "Oh, Michelene, don't you think that's kind of racist, just to have black people?" And I was like, "You know, Sam, you're Korean. When was the last time you saw, you know, a Korean Superman or any kind of superhero that had that kind of billing?" And it got quiet, you know. And so I think it's something that's, I don't know, sometimes I'm very heartened by what I see out there, and then other times I'm really disheartened. Like, you know, when I saw the Star Wars trailer, you know, and the Stormtrooper took off his mask, and it was like, oh my God. And then you just hear about all these people who are freaking out because they can't deal with the fact that it's not someone who looks like Luke Skywalker. And that's the thing, it's like, how myopic are you in your vision that you basically have to have people of color like crowbarred into the future? You know, I'm not really sure like what's going to happen, but I feel like I have hope, but I feel like there's still a lot of fighting that needs to be done to really kind of wedge in. And that's the thing that's both encouraging and also frustrating to me.
In response to your question, I think that
the notion of dealing with the now, and then also dealing with the issue of expectancy within image or representation is getting into a test of humanity. So to kind of, I guess, over-encompass what everyone's saying, Afrofuturism in a way is a test of our humanity, meaning the world's humanity. And so it really is saying, well, from going into a perspective of lineage, if we will be able to look back at this time, it's saying, well, at this point, you were less than human. Your community was less than human. And maybe that is a very daunting statement, but that is actually the point we can reach. You know, we can look back at 1963, and we can look back at the white community of Birmingham, and we can say your community was less than human. You sprayed little children down on the streets. You bombed churches and killed 4 little girls. You know, you assassinated people in their driveway. Your community at that point in time was absolutely less than human, and we have the right to do that. You know, context is everything. The Japanese American community in the 1940s can look at the white community in the United States and say, at that point, you were less than human. You put us in concentration camps all over the West Coast. You know, people of Jewish descent from Europe in the 1930s to the 40s can say to a group of people, you were less than human. We can even say the same thing with situations of genocide all over the world, and even if it is throughout the continent of Africa or Asia. We look at the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in the 70s. So in that sense, what it is for me is the idea of how do we, through our work, or whether that be artistic or political, or education, or whatever, how do we assert a form of existence for every person, but specifically in the context of which we are in the United States. So we're looking at the Black body or African Americans or this experience and saying, okay, our assertion is a test of your humanity from this point in time onward to ensure that my survival, your survival is dependent upon mine and vice versa. And so that is, I guess, where, you know, I answer or I address your question.
Okay, so that makes me think of all your answers. Actually, put me in the mindset of, you know, of Afrofuturism as a movement of change. You know, a change. One of the things I wrote down as a note, you know, one of the things about Afrofuturism that is important, that it is showing I always talk about the shift. The shift in thinking. One of the shifts is that concept of the person in the mirror, and that all of us are the people in the mirror. One of the things I see in Afrofuturism is that everybody's in it. It doesn't exclude anyone, which is always a difficult thing, especially in art, especially when for all, you know, in the concept of I, it's always I, and then there's the other. I don't think in Afrofuturism there is an other. There's just us. And I wanted to know how you all might imagine playing out the concept of us in your own works.
Can I answer this?
Jump on it.
Well, I think that's a great point. I guess in looking at our constant shifts, so if we are looking at, especially coming from the Black nationalist movement, the Black Power movement, into the Black arts movement, and there was this sense of that we must establish our own presence within music, you know, performance, our, you know, colony, or even possibly our own colony, or what have you, or existence, literally. But I think you're right. I guess in Afrofuturism, then it becomes an idea that well, you know, if you're going to be here, I'm going to be here as well. But I think that going back to the Star Wars trailer, you know, that was pretty exciting. You know, when you know this brother pops up in the stormtrooper outfit. You know what I mean? That was just like, wow, wow. You know what I mean? And then it's like, you know, of course, in Star Wars you have, you know, other interterrestrial beings, you know, other species itself. So, yeah, you know, that's pretty dope that I'm going to say this, in an imaginative, speculative, or literal context, meaning that I think that the power to imagine or even construct a future with non-human beings and their existence, I think it's important. I think it's relevant. I think it's necessary because it allows for us to extend our presence beyond ourselves and beyond our immediate surroundings. And so within that, that automatically is going to include an unknown of people you don't know, of food you don't know, or rivers you've never seen, trees, whatever. And so I think within that, I think that is where it's important that for so long, you know, since the post-civil rights movement, we've been constructed to confine ourselves to the U.S. I'm speaking specifically of African Americans. And now I believe this is where I'm saying the imaginative and speculative, we've been able to give ourselves permission to go to literally the galaxy and beyond. So that is where, as you're saying, yeah, it's going to be an us because it's an unknown. There's something way beyond us. And so I think that that's definitely important in Afrofuturism.
I think, especially with this question of us and the inclusiveness, it almost implies a utopian thing, but I don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves and assume that this is a sort of utopian existence where everyone was happy that we got to this point the way that we did or the way that we have. These changes, looking at the earlier Afrofuturist works like Octavia Butler's Patternist or Pattern Maker series, or Sun Ra's Space of the Place, or the electric Miles Davis era, or even Coltrane's really out stuff. These artists were working within their own frameworks and developing their own language and saying, yes, there is space for us, but this us is contingent on us. It's not contingent on anyone else's acceptance. When Space is a Place was released, both the record and the film, it wasn't released for an audience except for whomever wanted it. Not a black audience, not necessarily a white audience, even though Sun Ra's message was heavily influenced by Pan-Africanism and Marcus Garvey. It wasn't limited to that. And where did that note go? Yeah, again, this notion of we, even in the Octavia Butler Patternist series, it's a sort of a post-apocalyptic world that has forced everyone into post-racial world. And I think it's interesting that all of those works were sort of a reaction to maybe the lack of momentum that immediately happened after the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And noticing that even with legislation, things hadn't necessarily progressed to an extent that we were, where all levels of humanity were upon an equal hierarchy. And these works were a reaction to the time and the fact that they felt that things weren't moving quickly enough.
Excuse me. There are a couple of things that pop up for me based on what you said, based on the question. This idea of Afrofuturism as a movement of change. And so then I referred to the Wikipedia definition, and it defines it as an aesthetic and not a movement. And so for me, that's really interesting because anyone can adopt an aesthetic. I can start making things very, stylistically in a particular way. But a movement implies something much different. So I'm wondering if Mark, in his sort of coining the phrase, if he's thinking about it in terms of movement or aesthetic. Is this a sort of artistic style, or is this an effort towards some social or cultural change, which aesthetic then would fall within that as maybe secondary, tertiary, or something like that. But the primary idea here is that this movement of change means that this is created for a particular reason with a particular maybe sort of ideology maybe, or idea that this is being created to enact action, to make something happen. So for me to say, to deal with it as an aesthetic isn't quite enough, because anyone can adopt, as I say, adopt an aesthetic. But this idea of movement is really key, because then I go back to that definition, that meaning that they say, this idea of a critique. It's a critique on these things. So I think, okay, now that's something very interesting, because now we're talking about movement. Then we're talking about this movement then is critiquing. It's looking at something and saying, okay, these are the things these are the pros and these are the cons, and this is what I'm sort of contentious about, and this is what I'm in agreement about. And so for me, I think, Afrofuturism, for me, first of all, is problematic, because it's like you're putting a filter of Afro on this thing that existed already, which I'm not really for. I would just prefer you call it something else, because then it makes it derivative of something, which is kind of like, the thing that is always what we're always doing. We're always derivations of something. And so for me, so anyway, that was a little digression. But anyway, so this idea of movement is something that I'm really interested in. And so that's how I want to be with you in this idea of movement of change, and not simply an aesthetic.
For me personally, in terms of making my own comics, I actually haven't really diversified so much outside of, using brothers and sisters mostly, because I've been enjoying it so much. For my one comic, Stars the Anansi Kids, it actually takes place in an island in the West Indies where my mother's from, St. Vincent, and it calls on, West Indian, Afro-Caribbean folklore, the Sukuyan, and things like that. And I've really, really been enjoying kind of digging into that, and I've been enjoying also trying to think of ways I could incorporate those kinds of aspects of culture into future stories. I think a lot of the potential for success as far as diversifying goes, it lies in the way different characters are handled or treated. Some months ago, I was playing a video game, BioShock Infinite, and it takes place in this really weird kind of alternate universe. Yes. And they kind of are deifying like Ben Franklin and things like that. And there are situations where you're noticing that minorities are kind of being kept underfoot, but unfortunately, a lot of it was kind of like background art. Like, you're helping the cause of, say, black people, but you don't really interact with any of them except for maybe like one or two, and the rest of it is kind of window dressing. So while initially I got really excited about that, it was a little bit disappointing to see the way it was handled. So I guess going forward, it would, part of the key to success anyway would be in representation of characters, and characters that could be seen as relatable and realistic to people.
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad.
I too have played that game and noticed the weird Ayn Randian, like bootstrappy, neoliberal tone of the game, and the racial implications of that were very, very striking and startling to me. which also has to do with Whitney's discussion of aesthetic versus movement. And I think when the term Afrofuturism was coined in The Wire in '94, it was kind of the notion of whatever it is, the aesthetic, the movement, was kind of done a disservice by labeling it an aesthetic without realizing the sort of political nature that aesthetic movements have had within marginalized communities, especially communities of color. Hip hop, though an oral and visual aesthetic, was also very political. Free jazz, the same, going back to bluegrass or ragtime as well. All of these things were very political just by the inclusion of Black bodies within a majority white landscape. So to label it strictly an aesthetic, to me, ignores the fact that the immediate politicization of the presence of a Black body. And it also speaks to, like, again, an era of neoliberalism where there's this notion that you can separate the aesthetic from its other part, be it political or practical or labor-related, however. But I guess that's what was brought to mind when you mentioned aesthetic versus movement, is the very notion that you can extract an aesthetic from a movement speaks to a sort of neoliberal tone, again, which demands that one almost ignore the greater context for an immediate personal, or the possibility of an immediate personal gain. And that's where I feel like we're almost full circle back to, like, what is happening right now in this country and who is angry or who is doing X, Y, Z about that. And is it about, have we really gotten this far just because we can buy some things and we can have these iPads and we can sit up here at Brooklyn College and talk about some big-headed stuff? Or does it mean that, like, we can do these things, but does that mean the fact that we're invested into that, does that mean that we're already, like, continuing the greasing of the wheels of neoliberalism, that whole community's back?
Well, that just dives right into the question I've been dying to ask, which is, be it aesthetic, be it a movement, be it us, we, I, be it commentary or action of change, what or where would you all like to see happen with Afrofuturism? In general, in your own works?
I guess this may seem very superficial, but I'd like to see no reaction when a Black stormtrooper takes his helmet off in the middle of the desert and, have it cause this huge blow up with people kind of spitting some of the most acidic vitriol into threads and conversations. There was another, not Mockingjay, what was it before? Catching Fire.
Catching Fire.
Yeah.
Hunger Games.
Hunger Games, and there was I never read it and I never saw it, but I understand there was a huge blow up with one character and something happened to her, and when it was revealed in the movie that she was actually a Black person, people just got so twisted up. First of all, it's an imaginary character, and second of all, that's the kind of stuff that I guess really gets to me sometimes. And I would love to see a situation where, someone takes their helmet off, and it doesn't have to be like joy. You don't have to freak out when you see, Captain America's side buddy, whomever. Superheroes don't need to be, reskinned, for lack of a better term. I would just love to see a situation where it's accepted as par for the course, as part of the world, as part of the story. and that it can be enjoyed by everyone and not, reacted to purely on a superficial basis because it doesn't jam with whatever, ideals you had in your head, preconceptions.
I would like to see a revaluing of our own ideas versus, I guess, specifically, I'm going to say the African American community. That is the community of which I was born and raised. What is resourcefulness, for our own well-being? For me, Afrofuturism is gardening. For me, Afrofuturism is, going fishing, going hiking. It's funny, as much as I've started to really go deep into technology as much as possible, even more so than ever, I'm just like, I definitely could go, for a hike. I was doing a technology thing in Germany, and it was in the Alps. It was great. We'd all leave out after about 4 hours. Let's just go walk through the mountains for an hour. And that's what we did. And I think that for so much of what we've done with African American culture has been an adoption of a capitalist value system, or specifically a white middle class value system of things, of congratulating our youth for the power to consume and to buy things, the power to, I work at a corporation, or get a good job so you can buy things. And I think there has to be a fundamental shift within that thinking of, well, it's okay to, find a way to help others. It's okay to find a way to become a productive member of society. Even looking at gender roles. So your femininity, your womanhood is not defined by you being a mother. Your existence is not defined by you fitting into this archetype of what has been prescribed or just co-opted into. And that for me is Afrofuturism.
Yeah, I guess piggyback on what André said, a fundamental shift in values that no longer place sole credence upon earning and upon accumulation of capital, as well as just envisioning or working toward a society where these conversations aren't even necessary anymore, and that we look back at the notion of a panel on Afrofuturism and say, man, that's so like 20 years ago. That would be magnificent if we no longer had to discuss being black in the arts. It would be magnificent if we no longer had to, well, we're always going to discuss what the black experience is because the history is there, and that is important and should always be a part of our conversation. But not necessarily being tied to prescribed notions and archetypes. Again, as André said, not just in terms of gender or race or sexuality or any of these things. I feel like Afrofuturism isn't just, it isn't about just blackness, it's about gender, it's about sexuality, it's about a freedom from all of the oppressive systems, religion, all of them. And not having to have these conversations is what I would hope to accomplish via a notion of black futurism in my work or the greater fabric of whatever I do.
I have no expectation or wish for Afrofuturism whatsoever, but I do. I can agree with this idea of getting to a place culturally where blackness, this is tricky for me. I was going to say where blackness isn't a discussion, but I'm trying to think of a culture where their own history, heritage is not an issue. I don't want to get to that place where my blackness isn't an issue. I can understand how we want to get to a place perhaps where it's not jarring that to someone that I'm actually black, or something like that. But the fact, I don't know that if we continue to project ourselves, so far into this future without a consciousness about who we are, where we've come from, and the things that are ours, these social cultural practices and things and so on. I don't know how we could hold on to that. I don't know how we could retain that if we're not conscious about retaining that as we progress forward. So if Afrofuturism is about holding on to the things that belong to us and taking into the future these things that we deem important to us in our culture, then I'm down for that. But if it means that things become this kind of monotone, kind of neutral thing where nobody's different, everybody's the same, that's not interesting to me at all. I mean, at that point, bring in the androids and the drone, and the androids, because we can manufacture those to be all exactly the same and have no difference whatsoever. And I don't see much joy in that.
It's tough though, because when, yes, we should hold on to our centuries upon millennia of history, but it's the part that confounds me in the now is that our immediate history has been so toxic because of it, the way that it has been linked to America, that's it. It's just, there isn't any sort of rationalization or way around it. It's just really sad that our history has, especially recently, in past generations, has been so, we've been dehumanized so many times that that's part of what we now have to carry along. And I don't know any way out of that.
There's work in that. You know what I mean? There is a certain amount of work and responsibility that we as African American, I'm going to speak for, me and the culture that I'm particularly a part of, African American culture. That's the work. That's the work to suss through all of that stuff and say, okay, that's my stuff. That's not my stuff. That stuff imposed upon me by some outside person or some external. That has nothing to do with who I really am at my core. And I think once we start to ask these questions about who are we really? Yes, we're made up of all of this stuff. We're kind of hybrids, as I like to call it. But in that hybridity, there has been some things that have been born out of that hybridity that is particularly us. I think this is something that I'm still working on. This is the work that I'm doing right now, trying to figure out what is ours and what is not ours, so that I know what I'm taking forward with me. I know what I'm sharing with my nephews and my nieces, and so on and so forth. Like, you know what I mean? So that we're clear in a way about these things, and can see a difference between those things that are pathologies that have been sort of projected onto us or given to us, and the things that we actually value. And so it's a very good point. The point is that there is work that we have to do as well. I'm not asking anybody else to do the work. I'm asking us to do the work, to be willing to do the work and ask ourselves these things. And I think that, that's an important task of ours in going into this future.
And definitely that, because when we think about Afrofuturism or just the black body aesthetic, and what it means in this country. You know, one of the first things, and one of the people that was displayed earlier in the presentation, Octavia Butler, in her 1971 novel, Kindred, she dealt with that. Not that she had a solution, but I don't know if you all are familiar with that work, but in that work, Kindred, the main character is an African-American woman married to a white man who somehow, some way ends up going back in time to the South of cotton and slavery. And she figures out as she continues to go back and forth between present and past that she's going back to ensure that the white slave master impregnates her slave ancestors so that she can actually exist. That's what happens in the book. So in dealing with like the black body and who we are and what makes us us versus what's just been forced upon us, and how we decide how we pass what we want to pass down or exalt what we want to exalt, I think that's also part of Afrofuturism. But that's my thinking. I want to know what you might think about the black body aesthetic and how we can make our own decision on what we want to choose to exalt or not exalt, or uplift or not.
I think that is a very personal thing. You know, when we start to talk about the individual, the artist as an individual voice, the individual voice of the artist being able to speak and comment and critique on certain things. I think that this idea of those things that I want to put forward, in my case, I think about it in terms of sort of what am I interrogating at this moment in this piece? What is this piece about? What are the questions of this piece? And that kind of tells me, you know, what I want to put forward. I mean, I think I have an interest in the black body, which is why mine is always in my work. And if it's not mine, you know, there are some other black bodies in there, but you know, I use other, you know, bodies too. But I think it's important for me. I was just talking to someone actually about the fact that this one photographer that I know is a young black male photographer, but everyone that he photographs, aside from himself, is white. They're all white males. And so I thought that was really interesting to me. And I thought, that's a very interesting question. Then that made me think about Mapplethorpe, right? Well, he's this white man that's, you know, photographing all of these, you know, black male bodies. Mm-hmm. To my knowledge, the difference here is that Mapplethorpe has sort of said as his sort of artist statement that this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this black male body, you know, as a pure art experience, or, you know, I don't know that that's the case with this other person I'm talking about, but I bring that up to say that I can't imagine, and maybe that's my limitation, I can't imagine creating something. I can imagine me not being in it, but I can't imagine another black body not being in it unless I am commenting on something, because I think that we're left out so much, you know, in many situations, that it is my responsibility, it's my interest, it's my impetus to want to include and to show the variety of blackness within blackness, and not to sort of, you know, say that, I'm not saying that we're all this way, but what I'm saying is let's look at the range of blackness and we can understand the differences and the nuances that, you know, that most outsiders don't do. It becomes an homogeny of like, okay, that's our black archetype. That's, you know, so I guess that's one thing that I do. I make it a point to include me being a black me Whitney, or me André, or me, you know, Jeremy, kind of thing.
I'm gonna make a sort of a distinction between the type of work that I do, because I do performative work, which is not about sound, and then I do work that is sound-based, and I also do video-based work. Representing my body, when I perform live, my body is always there. There's no way that it can't be. So in terms of sound, it's kind of a non-question. Performatively, talking about movement and what we explored here at Brooklyn College with our thesis work, that was also, again, a question of, or it wasn't a question of what am I going to do with my black body. It never was a question. It's always going to be present. If I'm working on the physical portion of the work, then there will be a black body present. That's not anything that I would actively pursue. That's just who the circle of people I work with is. And yeah, it's that simple. When it comes to the video work that I do, I source from all places, and that's where I kind of get away from using a black body in representation and being able to source any image that I see fit, and really just taking any liberty as an artist that I see fit. And of course, there are times when I do use the body, the black body, in very specific representational ways. But that's the video work is the area where I feel most comfortable deviating from feeling as though, or that's the place where I feel most comfortable just using any sort of imagery because of the history of video and the history of image appropriation and so forth.
Those are actually two great segues into my thought, because for me, it's the body in relationship to what? The body in relationship to another body, the body in relationship to time, past, present, or future, the body in relationship to space, meaning this country, another country, this county, another county. And I think that is where then the narratives can change based off of the experience. And so then with Whitney's example of the personal, for me, that has been a constantly liberating action for myself when I've been able to understand my body in several contexts, from where I've come from, coming from Chicago to then coming to New York, to then living abroad, and me placing my body within those different contexts has always yielded new information every single time. And so then going into what Jeremy was saying, so now we're taking our bodies into this digital and this virtual space, into the 4D world. And I think that's where there is a great unknown. And I think to now kind of get into the scientific or the sci-fi metaphysics of it, is that's where I think the speculative and the imaginative leanings are just limitless and boundless. And who knows what that's going to become in the next 100, 200 years. And I think there is a place where my body becomes inhuman or ahuman. I'd rather say that. I'll say my body then becomes an ahuman existence in a space where it's just like we're just now, really entering into it. Who knows what that will be. And so that excites me. For others, it might not, but that's where I am right now.
Okay. I guess as far as representation and narrativity, I choose to project the bodies that I create to children and to young people, because I feel like those are the people who are going to be kind of carrying this whole journey forward. I won't be around forever with these people driving their silver Mustangs around 34th Street, crashing into Forever 21s and things. Get hurt out there. But I've had teachers, come to me and say, when you come to the school, or speak to these kids or give a talk at this library because, my kids, they don't like to read, and I'm trying to get them interested in reading. And you look at libraries, I mean, I walk past my local library and they have manga in the displays by the window. So they're really trying, I mean, not only are they seeing manga as a more legitimate, literative form, but they're really trying to get kids interested in reading and not wholly dependent on being spoon-fed. I want kids, men, young men, and girls too, to be able to see that there's like a place for them at that storytelling table. And I think one thing that might help in doing that is by cramming as much crazy stuff into their heads and into their imaginations as possible. You can visualize yourself as being part of these stories and these worlds, and you can create your own worlds, and you can create your own characters and your own flora and fauna. You can make it wholly unique, and you can do whatever you want. So that's, I guess, where I'm trying to kind of get my wedge in terms of how the black body is represented, is a way that is inviting and accessible to young minds, and will help them maybe kind of encourage them to step forward and enter that world on their own.
You want to open it up now?
Are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you. I find it interesting that a lot of the ways that we look at, we as communities view the future and work with the future and deal with the future is similar to the way that we deal with the past and look at the past, particularly as people of color. As creative artists, I was making the social media circuit a while back. Viola Davis on Tavis Smiling, she was talking about the help. And she was saying the way that, largely that Tavis's view of art and of the black experience, was killing the black actor and killing the black artist, because the community, particularly the African American community, paints itself into a box. Particularly when looking at art that references a different age, the 60s at that point, when it was dealing with the help. Similarly, with the future, I wonder how you feel that the African American community does itself a disservice when looking at the future and opening our minds, and limits the opportunities for artists to look at the future from an Africanist perspective. So if you could talk about that.
Wow. The thing that I find most troubling in terms of that, or the thing that's the most seductive, is just the visuals that come through in media and in movies, in the many forms of entertainment. It's frustrating because I feel like there is almost like this message that's telling people to consume. Get your hair done a certain way, wear this, buy that. And I'm not really sure, and in certain respects I feel kind of powerless, and to kind of change that, I guess, in a single-handed way. I feel like, I feel like it's very difficult. I don't really know, how to address that as far as a solution, because I feel like it's almost like a battle. At one point, I was giving computer classes in my neighborhood, and I mean, they were free, and you had free access to computers and free access to classes, and the parents had to march their kids downstairs and get them to sign up and get them to come to class and be focused. And a lot of times I feel like they didn't, this is kind of weird, but there wasn't as high a value attached to it because it was free. I know it sounds weird, but it wasn't slick and it wasn't packaged nicely. It was like marker on oak tag, poster, and it was like, you can come in and for X amount of hours a day. So I find that that's like one of the biggest battles, me personally, in terms of getting through to people, is trying to kind of see the inherent value in things that aren't cool, in literacy, in math and science. Of course, that's kind of skewing into school, but things that are, I guess, more cerebral in a lot of ways too, and not just entertaining.
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that popped to my head was, I guess if you see, I think the past is the future, because the past sets you up for the future. It's like a savings account. You want to buy this house, you're just going to go out and boom, buy a house unless you got the money. Or you can see it as, like, well, I got to save and I got to make sure my credit is good and blah, 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 do all these steps, and then you go and you buy a house, 5 years from now. So I say the past is the future, and I say that it's only a painting in a box, I think, if you see the past as a limitation. If we see our past as something to be embarrassed, shameful, or limited by, then that's painting us in a corner, because then that means that we would never want to talk about these things that is our past. And I think that directly relates to how we conceive of ourselves in the future, in terms of, can I do that role? Okay, so she was a maid in the help, and we know Butterfly McQueen, and so okay, so are you embarrassed and shameful of Butterfly McQueen because as the maid in Gone with the Wind, or is that just what that was at that point? That's what she could do at that moment, and then from there, we've gone. So I think that I have this thing that I'm convinced that I guess it's the Sankofa thing, from Ghana, the Akan, the Adinkra symbols. The Sankofa bird is to refer to the past to move to the future. If you don't know, I don't want to get on a soapbox about it, but it is true. It is there is a resonating principle there that says, if you are not aware of the things that have happened in your past, then your future you will be repeating. You won't know that you're repeating. That's the bad part about it. You won't even know that you're doing the same thing again because you're not aware of it. And so I think that directly relates to how I see myself as an African American performer, representing myself as a maid in the help. In terms of like, am I embarrassed about being a maid, or is this just a role that I can play now and have the choice of playing now? If that, addresses that.
It's interesting, the notion of painting ourselves into a box when so much of what has framed Blackness has been mediated through a third party, or a second party, we'll say. So to think of how or whether or not we've painted ourselves into a box, I have to then think of the mediatized images which are influencing the greater culture, which then influence us, and the shift that has seemed to occur within Black culture's with Black culture's relationship to the greater culture. That at some point we went from being influencers of culture to just consumers of culture that is framed as ours, but just spoon-fed back to us via sound or via moving image. So to even begin to consider what these notions of the corners that we're being painted into, I have to go to the source of where, who's giving us the paintbrushes? What are the colors they're giving us to paint with? you know, what is the palette in front of us, and is that palette true to the actual experience, or is this just the palette of neon colors that speaks the loudest or shines the brightest? Well, does that make any sense? So yeah, that's what I have to immediately consider.
That was a pretty good interview because we could see both sides. You know, the relevancy again. I guess this was the 21st century, but then you had this incredibly talented black female acting as a maid, but then at the same time, ontologically looking at it, she really did an amazing job as an actor. So it's the craft itself, acting, the art, versus the representation. And I think that that is where, especially within the African American community, we sometimes have a hard time of dealing with things or dealing with the art in itself. Because sometimes, I mean, how many times have we always, you know, oh, we gotta support this artist. Yeah, but they're not really good. You know what I mean? Whereas it's kind of like on the flip side, yeah, Sun Ra's doing this, you know, this amazing work, or, you know what I mean? Or, okay, specifically, I'll give this example within that, to counter that. Lisa Bonet and Angel Heart. She did a great job, and it was a good film. And it was a very powerful role for a black woman to play at the time. However, a majority of the African American community really rejected. I mean, they was just like, you're a weirdo. You do all, you know, you think you're sick, you know, because this bohemian black woman, you know, being very sexually confident on the screen as an actor, and this is 1989. Yeah, I mean, like, and I always say, if she had been in Europe, you know, where it's, you know, Pedro Almodovar might have made her a star, but, you know, she was here in the United States. And so, you know, that's the thing, is that, you know, once you step out, or once you've stepped outside that box, well, I think now, we're just now getting to the place where, as a community, we're just like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. You know, like Janelle, Ibadu's been doing it for so long consistently. You know, and she, believe me, that 90s, she was that weird girl. And now, oh yeah, she cool. But, because she stayed true to the form. Whereas now, a space for Janelle Monáe to talk, 20 years ago in the mid-90s, we all know Janelle Monáe could have done it. But now she has the space to do it. So, I mean, in a way,
But like,
we're getting there.
Who was influencing values?
Where was the influence on values, which then says to, or gives a community the impetus to say this isn't, these aren't black values, or this isn't an exhibition of blackness to Lisa Bonet? Like, where is that influence coming from?
Right, and I think that that's the thing, and I guess to be comical with it, it's kind of like in when we're watching Coming to America, you know, and Eddie Murphy's on stage with Sexual Chocolate. Like, that boy can sing. And the friends are just like, he can't sing. He's not good. You know, and it's that thing of just like, can this person sing well? Can this artist write well? And I think that we as a community have to begin to be able to do that first. And this is going into, I guess, what Michelene was saying in the sense of this value system. Let's learn how to code. You know, let's learn how to become literate in the digital world with computers first. Let's learn how to write music. You know, you'd be surprised at how many artists, musicians can't actually read or write music. You know, let's learn just some concrete things first of structure to then support our experiences and our narratives. And I think that that's where we're starting to finally get a better sense of clarity, possibly, within our community. That helps us then to say, well, this is how you abstract this narrative.
We were doing that before we knew how to do that. I mean, before, you know what I mean? Before it was like, okay, this is how you do it. You know, let's face it. I mean, right? We're talking jazz, we're talking blues, we're talking, you know, I mean, they were syncopating and harmonizing and all of this, and they couldn't write. That's not to say that you shouldn't know how to write and do all of that, but that is to say that just because you don't have that skill doesn't put you out of the realm of being competent, right? There is a difference in terms of competency because I don't have access and because the systemic structure is not allowing new computers to come into the school, and this is why I'm not up to par on my computer skills, and different from I have a perfectly good computer here and I just choose not to. You know what I mean? There's a difference there.
But I also think it requires that a person in that situation be kind of have a real fire in them about getting to that point instead of just being a person who just wants to kind of get there. You know what I mean? Like, you don't necessarily have to have like a classical teaching, but a person can be very, very motivated about, how they learn, especially now with like this, the information is so accessible. It's a lot more accessible to a lot more people. But I think that there's also people who either have it or don't have it and don't really want to do that, take that trip or, take that journey and do that work. So that can, I guess, be a stumbling block.
I can talk loud. Everybody? So I am we over here in Amen Corner. We both teach in public schools, so we got the Amen Corner for you over there. And something that I'm thinking about is how do we deconstruct, as African Americans, how do we deconstruct adaptations from white dominant culture? And what I'm thinking about that is a creative practice. And so all of you guys are working within this aesthetic of Afrofuturism. And I guess my question is, what is your practice? What is your way that you just dream up your ideas that are outside of that box? How are you getting to that place? What do you do? Because I'm thinking about like what the real work is as a Black woman to pull those things apart and to make those decisions about what I want to exalt and what I don't want to exalt. When my history is, I'm the descendant of slaves in this country. And so, yes, there is an African experience, but what I know in my blood is an African American experience. So how do I know that I personally have had a lot of privileges that have allowed me to see a computer and want to, have a fire under my butt. But I teach children who don't have that. So I'm just posing that question, like, what is your creative practice? How are you guys thinking outside of the box?
I can answer that really quickly. So one of the things that I look for is signifiers within the specific African American experience. What is it that we have done or are doing that possibly is unique or maybe very, very specific? One of the things I look at specifically is migration. So this issue of, because many of my people came from the Mississippi Delta to Chicago. So this issue of us always being in a place of displacement, we can look at that now in the sense of gentrification. And again, this sense of displacement. So almost in the sense of we're migrant people. So my thing is, okay, well, how do I abstract or how do I turn migration on its head? Or how am I able to speculate on, okay, well, what's going to be the next migration? To where? And I think that is my practice in the sense of taking, and I think this is something I worked with a lot with Whitney and Jeremy. Once we were in grad school, this is something that we were able to do. I guess something I really like, context is so important for me. So then it's like, okay, so what am I doing in that specific time and place? And why did we do that collectively? And so then with that information, I say, well, okay, how can I remix this? How can I skew this? You know, how can I chop this up? How can I DJ screw it? You know what I mean? How can I Ella Scott Fitzgerald this? And I think that that is, again, what Whitney is saying. This is what we've always done. That necessarily, especially in the discourse, in the academic discourse, has not been categorized or archived enough as for historical reference for future generations, which we must continue to do. But that is my practice.
There was a time when I was heavily influenced by Japanese animation. And one of the things that I thought so alluring about it was the fact that they often were pulling from their own culture and folklore. And the more you look into it, it's really, really deep. Like, it's like a tiramisu of, like, you know, demons and monsters and heroes and all this. And I thought, you know, well, you know, why do we have that? And I was like, oh, well, maybe we do have that. So in starting to look, like, I read a lot of different folk stories, and you know, you find out about the orishas and things like that. And it's, you know, it's once again, it's frustrating. You know, trying to get young people to see these things with the same value that they place on something like Naruto. Because, you know, you go to these conventions and you sit there with your books and you're like, yeah, I'm sure to, you know, and they're like, oh, that's nice. Oh, you know, and they're gone over there. And then sometimes I've had parents like pull their kids back and be like, look, it's the Sukuya. And they're like, you know, so it's like a constantly trying to kind of reweave those and find out about the pathway that those cultures and the folklore has taken. You know, you find things that have been coming from Africa, and then they got split, because when, you know, slaves came to America, they weren't allowed to practice their stuff, and those things changed, and they took on new meanings. So trying to always educate myself in that way, and trying to find ways to weave those kinds of things, because I do think it's important knowing the value and valuing your past, and kind of weaving that into stories. People can kind of see, you know, where you came from is it's fascinating, you know, and you should look at that and you know, check it out for a minute. Is kind of how I try, and also just, well, my imagination is very weird to begin with, so it kind of works. They work very well together, and that's how I try to pull people in.
I have to, absolutely. But this is very easy. Interrogation. I ask the question of the question. I keep asking and I keep asking and see where that leads me. It's frustrating for people that are in that process with me, because I'm constantly asking why, how, what, where, why, how again, because I think that sort of this questioning of the question deepens and deepens and causes you to go deeper so far down that once you get down to somewhere, you've created something. Something has been created already. And then there's also actually the thought of getting lost in the question. Because if we know everything right away, then there's no reason to ask the question. So if you have to kind of accept that asking the question of the question is going to lead you through the rabbit hole, but that process of being in the rabbit hole, you're going to bump into things that are going to dawn on you, and you're going to say, oh wow, okay, I didn't know that. So, you know, for instance, something like, you know, I created this piece called JoJo, and JoJo is this sort of charm figure, as I like to call him. He's kind of like Juju. I just changed it to mean an O instead of a U. So Juju, from the, you know, sort of Nigerian sense of, you know, fetish and blah blah blah. So I wanted to create something that was kind of African American. So I said, okay, well, JoJo's charms are going to be, he's going to make collard green and black-eyed pea kind of like these little charms, and you know, he's going to sprinkle them with glitter and, you know, this kind of thing. And so I got to that point, though, by asking, well, what is Juju? How does that respond to me? Why do I respond to that? Is it really in my history, or is that something that I'm just taking because it seems interesting? You know, what as black-eyed people, so all these questions, so interrogating each thing, so not just asking what that is, but like really like probing and deeply thinking about what these things mean to me or to an outside, someone other than me, and then letting that sort of journey let me discover something. And I think sometimes that works well with students. They just have to be be willing to, kind of stay with you in this process. But that, could be a good way of sort of conjuring or casting a spell over them, so that they don't even realize they're in the process. And next thing you know, maybe they're excited. So, interrogation is not the white light interrogation kind of thing, but kind of.
I prefer to work from a place of distance and abstraction, and both done in such a consistent fashion that it becomes familiar, and working to expand whatever pre-existing notions a person may have, especially within sound and music. The pre-existing notions someone may have of music, period, let alone black music or black male music. I introduce unfamiliar elements in unfamiliar ways consistently, constantly, until they become familiar, not unlike trance music or sacred music or religious music would do through chant. Just the same, I think a huge part of that is introducing elements of unfamiliar elements and uncomfortable elements, which then work to sort of expand what might have been a limited notion of whatever type of work you're seeing or experiencing. And even, going back to when I worked as an educator, I used to teach middle school band. I used to be a band director. And this is like, this is how I dress. This is how I dress for a long time now. I am not changing how I dress to come into a classroom, period. I am going to introduce a very unfamiliar element to the students until they understand that it is normal for an educator to walk into the room, for a black male educator to walk into the room and look this way, but still have a command of the knowledge, which he does. And over the however long their time with me in the band was, you would gradually see students starting to normalize the different things that you bring into the classroom. It's not unlike food,
I think that's about it. I think we have to peace out. It's now 8:30, unfortunately. Thank you guys so much for coming once again. Really thank you very much to our host at Brooklyn College, John Yanofsky, who's of the Brooklyn College. I really just personally just want to thank this panel and the moderator for coming together. Thank you, Michelene, for coming in. At the introduction to Tim, Jeremy, Whitney, and I, we all go way back. Continue to please engage with us. I believe through the Facebook, you can probably find our information through the Facebook posts and stuff like that. Please follow our work. If you have any questions, I'm sure we can probably meet outside or something like that. Or, keep it moving.